Hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Classic Gaming Brothers. I'm Seth.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right. We are the Classic Gaming Brothers.
That's right.
That's right.
This is not the episode after the Blair Witch episode. This is the episode after the Blair Witch episode.
Yeah, so 2 weeks ago, I would have been in the woods.
Yes.
And I bumped into producer Doug.
Did we talk about that in the last episode?
Kind of. I made a reference to it, and you acknowledged it.
Yeah, so are you okay?
Oh yeah, I was just in the woods.
Where were the woods?
They're wherever the tunnel led me, because I went down one of the tunnels in our vault, and yeah.
I went down one of the tunnels, and it brought me to the Logan Expressway.
Yeah, mine took me maybe 10 miles out of Boston, according to the Last of Us TV show, and I ended up in the deep forest.
Can you make a topical regional joke that will fit in there? Like, you must have been in Quincy. But I know Quincy has no forest, so that's not fun.
Well, yeah, nowhere 10 miles out of Boston has a forest.
What if you went north?
Yeah, it's a little bit north, maybe.
What about east?
Go east for a bit, you'd get there.
You left east for Boston, 10 miles? I think you'd end up in the ocean.
If you keep going, you're gonna, go over to, like...
the island that H.P. Lovecraft's monsters come from?
Yeah, well, I was gonna say, if you really keep going, you'll end up on the Iberian Peninsula, I think somewhere around Spain or Portugal.
That's greater than 10 miles. I was
that is true. That is greater than 10 miles.
I was thinking of something like a forested island where HP... I was just trying to keep this episode spooky.
One of the Boston islands, one of the harbor islands, probably has some trees on it.
Maybe that's where the tunnel goes.
Maybe, but it was nice that producer Doug was there, and he turned on some lights for me, and he brought us cigars.
Was he always there?
Yeah, I think he was following me the whole time, unless there were just other weird things in the woods.
Well, we would have to get clarity from producer Doug, and he generally doesn't speak unless he's outside the studio, because he's a professional. Anyway, Zach.
Yes, Seth.
What have you recently been playing?
Seth, recently I've been playing Ghost of Tsushima, released in 2020. It is a game that was released on PS4, and then later they made a version for the PS5. Well, they released a version for the PS5. It's the same as the PS4 version, it's just nicer looking. It was developed by Sucker Punch and published by Sony. Ghost of Tsushima takes place during the first Mongol invasion of Japan around 1270. You play as Jin Sakai, who is the remaining member of Clan Sakai. He is a samurai and ward to Lord Shimura, his uncle. And his uncle is the steward of the island of Tsushima, like a feudal steward. He looks after the island of Tsushima on behalf of the emperor. And this is during Japan's, feudal warring periods where there were samurais, and samurais worked on behest of their masters and often served as a protection force for the areas that they worked in. Jin is one of the few samurai left on the island of Tsushima because when the Mongols invaded, they killed a bunch of them all at once. So Jin is now left, and he is trying to find his uncle who has been captured by the Mongol invaders. And you get to explore the island of Tsushima as Jin, and you get to learn how to be a samurai. You wield a katana. You get to learn to fight with the katana. You can learn different fighting stances so that you can fight different types of enemies, such as shield-wielding enemies or spear-wielding enemies. And you get to ride a horse, and you get to ride the horse all around. You can also do other fun things, like there's a dedicated button to play a flute. And there's also a dedicated button to bow. And it's an interesting game of this character learning both to work within the binds of the Bushido code and also to bend the code a bit because of the necessity of war. I really like it. It's definitely heavily influenced by samurai films, specifically those directed by Akira Kurosawa or Masaki Kobayashi. It also reminds me a lot of the Lone Wolf and Cub series, which was a popular series of samurai films about technically I think the Lone Wolf and Cub is a Ronin, but Ronin are tangentially related to samurai. They're a masterless samurai. But yeah, Ghost of Tsushima, a lot of fun. I really like it. It's got a lot of fun areas to explore. It's a very pretty game. It is just absolutely gorgeous. It's also got some fun modes you can play around in. There is a Kurosawa mode, which turns the game black and white and adds a film grain filter and makes the game feel like you're playing in a Akira Kurosawa movie, which is really neat, especially as a film buff. I really enjoy that. But yeah, if you're a fan of open-ended games, if you like the films of Akira Kurosawa, and if you are really keen to play as a samurai, I highly recommend Ghost of Tsushima, and I look forward to playing through the game so I can play through the sequel, Ghost of Yotai, which just came out.
That's exciting. I was kind of interested in the Ghost of Tsushima. This is different than the Sekiro game.
Yes.
Sekiro is Souls-like.
Yeah, Sekiro is a bit more of a Souls-like game. Ghost of Tsushima is what I like to refer to it as Red Dead Redemption, but in the Japanese feudal period.
Oh, so I might like it.
Instead of guns, you have a katana.
Maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, I think you would like it a lot. It does rely a bit on, proper like parrying and stuff like that, as you would with a sword fighter, but it's definitely not like a Souls-like game. It is a lot easier than a Souls-like game, but not like easy peasy. It's just, I'm not dying every couple of seconds. What about you? What have you been recently playing?
First of all, I'd like to start off with a game alert. I have beaten another game.
Game alert. Game alert.
I beat Suzerain.
Nice.
In Suzerain, I played as a centrist reformist. And let me tell you something about centrist reformists. Being in the middle means you piss everybody off, and you generally don't get anything accomplished, to the point where he got voted out of his own party at the end, and he started his own party and lost everything and had to retire. And in fact, I got an achievement. So the game takes place where you're the president of Swordland, Sorland, and the people are Swordish, Sordish, and I got an achievement that is just another Swordish president, and it was just retired after losing an election, and it's a rare achievement. Only 3.8% of the players have received this award, and 40% have beaten the game. So out of 40% have beaten it, I got a rare achievement of just being another person in history. I also got another Alfonso achievement, where I made my party obstruct me towards the end of my term, and also triggered a Great Depression. I also ran on fixing the economy, and it was stable for, I want to say, like 4 months out of my entire term, and then it was completely unstable and debilitating. There was a point in time where I was driving it great upwards and everything was going like gravy, and then it fell dramatically, and everything collapsed. It showed me as I played through it, even if you try to do the right things, you'll still lose. Now I'm playing another president. I'm deciding that I'm going to make Swordland great again and be a populist and see how far I can get away with it. And so far, everything's been good. And I'm using every opportunity to take bribes and to control the media. So we'll see what happens. And maybe I'll give an update on my Suzerain second playthrough later in the show. And by later in the show, I mean later in this broader meta show.
Yeah, not later in this episode. Yeah.
I mean, unless I was playing it secretly. The game that I've recently been playing, though, since I talked about Suzerain a few episodes ago, is Escape Simulator, which is a first-person puzzle game where you can play as this by yourself, or you can play with friends. You can also play it in VR. I almost sound like a little bit like a Dr. Seuss book. You can play it up on the plane. You can play it in VR. You can play it with your friends. You explore various different escape rooms where you manipulate things, examine things, and ultimately try to find ultimately to find the way out of the room, also to find hidden pieces of, there's collectibles spread throughout every episode. I'm currently doing the first real episode where you're in an Egyptian tomb and you have to translate hieroglyphics. You have to make sure you clean everything off to make sure that you can see everything and unlock certain chests and puzzles. It's pretty fun, and it's a good kind of tangible puzzle game, and it's been kind of a lot of fun. I played the Escape Simulator 2 demo. It got me interested in getting Escape Simulator, and I picked it up over the sale before the fall. I don't know. I bought it on sale and it was cheap, so that's where it was. But so Escape Simulator. It's been a lot of fun.
Great. Sounds fun. Well, to get into today's episode, we're continuing our theme of talking about horror games this October, and we're talking about one of the big franchises, specifically the first game in the franchise of the Fatal Frame series. So horror and Sony, they kind of go hand in hand, be it the zombie-infested streets of Resident Evil or the foggy terror of Silent Hill or everyone's favorite Scissorman in Clock Tower. When you think of Sony, I at least often think of the horror games that they produced, specifically for the original PlayStation, and then jumping into the new generation of the PlayStation 2. And one of those games that really defined the genre was Fatal Frame. It's also one of the few horror games that I know of that has the moniker on its cover based on a true story, which I'm going to spoil something for you. Fatal Frame, the game, is not based on a true story, but it was inspired by reportedly true events. And we're going to go over those during this game's history. Development on Fatal Frame began back around 1996. Director Makoto Shibata had recently completed the game Tecmo's Deception: Invitation to Darkness for the PS1, and Shibata had begun to consider ideas for a different game. He wanted to kind of come up with something new. One idea that he had was based on some childhood memories of his, and he really kind of had these memories in his mind, and they were related to a particular time in his life where he lived in a decently sized house, and they just kind of stuck there in his mind and reemerged when he was trying to come up with ideas. In an article from The Escapist magazine, it's mentioned that when Shibata was a child, he used to hear strange noises in his house. For example, one night his parents left with his grandfather after his grandfather had a pretty bad fall. They rushed him to the hospital. Shibata was left home alone, and he started to hear the sound of footsteps slowly creeping up the stairs and stopping just outside of his bedroom door. Thinking it could have been one of his parents back home from taking his grandfather to the hospital, he opened the door and no one was there. He also remembered one time waking up in the night and hearing voices coming down the road. Now, they lived kind of out in the country. There wasn't really a lot of people that would have been walking down the road in the area they lived, and he remembers them speaking in a hushed or whispered tone. But when he went to go look, no one was there. Now, at some point, Shibata's father gave him a slightly busted camera, and he started to kind of play around with it. He never really took any photos, but he just had this camera, and he often wondered what it would be like if you took a photo of an empty room, got that photo developed, and saw a ghost. And this became a fear of his, and why he never took a photo with this camera.
Do you know what this reminds me of?
What?
The Goosebump books, Say Cheese or Die.
It does kind of remind me of Say Cheese or Die.
That's whenever I hear about Fatal Frame, I just think about that. I just go, remember that Goosebump book with the cover and they're like cooking a barbecue and they're all dead?
Yeah.
All these memories gave Shibata the idea for a game that used the camera as a primary focal point of the game itself. With the PS2 having more advanced hardware than the PS1, the team would begin getting work on a game that went under the codename of Project Zero. Team members who previously worked on Tecmo's Deception would be brought onto the Project Zero development staff. They would be tasked with designing characters, coming up with sound effects, and composing music that best fit the theme. I'm just thinking about a licensed Say Cheese or Die video game now.
I mean, that's just Fatal Frame. Fatal Frame is just the licensed Say Cheese or Die game.
Yeah, Bobby Stein missing out on his royalty checks. One element that became crucial to designing the game was emphasizing a color theme of black and white. White would represent hope, while black would represent fear. A third color, red, would represent the character of Miku being alive. Because of the focus on the color, the team did a lot of work to make sure that the character's light would allow for a blend of shadows and shading when you walked into a dark area. The game is set in a Japanese mansion, an idea that Shibata stole from his prior work on Deception that would go unused for the game Deception. The aesthetic was also influenced by a lower budget Japanese horror film and war film. The original plan was to set the game in the modern era, but it was changed to the 1980s to create a feeling of isolation, as the character wouldn't be able to rely on a mobile phone. Elements of the story, which we'll get to a bit later, would be trimmed out, such as a sequence that would have depicted a reference to seppuku, the act of ritual suicide, historically done by a samurai when they had lost a master.
As mentioned earlier, Shibata had some bizarre experiences growing up, and these experiences didn't stop when he was a child, and they also didn't stop when production began on Fatal Frame. And it wasn't also just experienced by him. The production team would have weird experiences that they all reported on. According to the write-up from The Escapist magazine, the team would often work late in the office. Sometimes members would work alone. It was a smaller team, and being that they were working on a game for a decently sized company, they often often needed to work late hours or work around other people and come into the office late. One story goes that one of the developers was working late one night when she heard the familiar sound of a keyboard clicking behind her. She stood up to go see if one of her colleagues was still working with her and, talked to them. And as she stood up, the sound stopped. She looked around and there was no one in the room. She sat back down and the sound started again, and it kept going. Reportedly, it also didn't happen just once. Every night that she worked alone, she would hear the sound of a keyboard clicking, like someone else was typing, and she never saw a single person working with her during this time, and she just accepted it. She was just like, this is very scary and very weird, but they're not hurting me, so I'm just going to deal with it. And she wasn't the only one. One voice actor once heard a loud knocking sound coming from inside his soundproofed recording booth. One of the sound designers reportedly heard a weird noise coming out of his speaker, and in a write-up on the Fatal Frame fan book posted in 2012, that staff member even claims that he recorded this audio and sampled it into the sound effects of Project Zero. And the stories don't stop there. The Fatal Frame fan book offers stories from other members of the team, such as a programmer who was staying late. He left to go take a smoke in the break room, which was in the basement, which I always forget, especially in Japanese companies, as I'm learning. Their smoking area is just another room in the office building. Like, it wasn't outside. It was often just a room in the basement, or like a different room that no one used. And I bet those rooms are very stinky. Anyway, he went to the basement smoking area and then came back to his desk and noticed kind of a weird smudge on his screen. When he stepped closer, he realized it wasn't a smudge. It was the reflection of a woman's face wearing yellow clothing. He tried to look around to see where the reflection was coming from, but couldn't find anything. And then the very next morning after this happened, he had to be rushed to the hospital because he had a severe migraine.
Shibata would often stay around at the office on some nights and also sleep at his desk. He often would get woken up at 4 a.m. by the sound of footsteps walking around him, which could also be just because of sleep deprivation and sleeping uncomfortably on your desk. One night when he was at home, he saw a woman in his own house. She had black hair and a white kimono and was lying on his futon. The light in the room refused to turn on, and when he started to shout at the spirit, it faded away. Team members began to wear charms around the office, hopefully trying to ward off any unwanted spirits from sticking around. I'm also primarily a skeptic when it comes to all things supernatural. However, there was a woman in Japan that did live in somebody's closet in Japan for a significant period of time and would come out and take some stuff from their pantry and just lived in a closet. There was a hole in the closet.
Yeah, I'm less afraid of ghosts. I'm more afraid of people living in my closets.
I'm skeptical about ghosts. I'm not skeptical about people doing things, because usually the worst things that can be done are done by humans. So ultimately, was it the stress that Shibata was having all this stuff going on, and the team members and the rest of the staff, trying to ward off unwanted spirits? Probably. But despite the otherworldly presence that seemed to haunt the production, the game would go on to get complete. The game would release under the name Zero in Japan, which was to keep the project title, as the team felt it reflected the natures of the ghosts in the game being of nothingness. Zero released in 2001. However, in the North America version, the name would get changed to Fatal Frame and release in February of 2002. The European version would be changed the name of the game again to Project Zero and was released in August of 2002. An Xbox version would release in 2002 in North America and 2003 in Japan and Europe.
Now, the first Fatal Frame game is set in the year of 1986. Miku and Mafuya Hinasake are two orphan siblings who have the unique ability to sense the supernatural. One night, Mafuyu goes to look for one of her tutors, and the tutor apparently has entered a mansion, an abandoned mansion, so Mafuyu follows the tutor and then goes missing. Now, Miku must search for her sister and enters the mansion alone, and as she enters the mansion, she realizes that she's actually not alone because the mansion is filled with ghosts. But thankfully, she does have a camera that is able to not only see the ghosts, but stop them. The game features multiple endings depending on the difficulty you play on, and there is a unique ending for the Xbox version of the game. Fatal Frame shares similar elements to other survival horror games. It's played from the third person. You explore this spooky dark mansion. You find cassette tapes and documents that detail the story you're surrounded by. You solve puzzles to get to different parts of the mansion. You collect health items when you're injured, and so on and so on. However, instead of having any weapons like a gun or like a sword or something. The combat is done using an antique camera called the camera obscura. When your character senses a ghost, her health will begin to drain. You then need to use your camera's viewfinder to locate the ghost and hold its image long enough to take a photo. Taking the photo damages the ghost. If you get too close, the ghost will disappear, but getting closer also means you get a better photo of a ghost, and thus it does higher damage. So you have to kind of balance out the distance you are to take the best photo while also making the ghost stay in the frame, or else it will disappear and keeps hurting you. You can also upgrade the camera, so you can get it so that it reloads faster with the film. You can set it so that it will stagger ghosts as you're kind of on the viewfinder. And there are also non-lethal ghosts that you'll encounter, non-deadly ghosts, who can just be photographed for points that you can use to upgrade the camera. So this is kind of the whole shtick with Fatal Frame. I mean, it's why it's called Fatal Frame here. It is heavily reliant on this camera mechanic, which I do think is kind of a interesting mechanic. The idea that you're technically weaponless except for a camera that is the only thing that can see these spirits. Now, Seth, how did Fatal Frame do?
Upon release, Fatal Frame did well in Japan. It sold around 42,000 units and was ranked top 300th best-selling game of the year, which is not awesome, but it wasn't also horrible. There was other games that sold under it. The European version sold 12,000 copies, and North American sales weren't incredibly well tracked, but it was considered an unexpected success by the team, and they credited the fact that J-horror films like The Ring were becoming more popular in the Western market. Like The Ring, play Fatal Frame. The game would have received mostly positive reviews. Eurogamer gave it a 9 out of 10, GamePro gave it a 3.5 out of 5, GameSpot gave it a 7.1 out of 10, and Famitsu gave it a 32 out of 40. So overall, with those sales and those reviews, it was a game. It did go into that niche genre of kind of like horror, which, you know, there's not, in the grand scheme of things, there's not a lot of horror games. Fatal Frame would go on to lead an entire series, so it sold successfully enough to warrant a second one. There was a sequel titled Fatal Frame 2, Crimson Butterfly, and then there was another sequel. I was going to say what comes after a sequel, and I guess I say another sequel.
Yeah.
Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented. There was also a Wii remake of Crimson Butterfly, which would go on to release in 2012, but only for the Japanese, European, and Australian audiences. A fourth game, Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse, released in 2008 for the Wii in Japan. This would later be given a worldwide release as a remaster in 2023 for the Switch, Xbox, PS4, PS5, and PC. I feel like back in like 2008 when the Wii was out and about being the main console for Nintendo, I feel like there wasn't a lot of like really crazy games that were like bad,
like horror
games. Like
there weren't like horror. There weren't really any like it was pretty kid friendly.
Yeah, I feel like it was kid friendly. Like people would think that it was like Pokemon Snap except violent.
Pokemon Snap except with ghosts. You know what would be a great crossover? Fatal Frame, but in Lavender Town.
Oh, that would be a really good crossover.
Yeah, where you have to like get photos of Ghastlies and Haunters, and I don't know. There's probably more ghost Pokemon now that I don't really care about because there's like a bajillion of them. But Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar are the important ones. But then there's probably like, I don't know, Gen, whatever it is now. But yeah, like just walking around Lavender Town, taking photos of ghosts. That could be fun.
But how many of those other Gen Pokemon are in Lavender Town?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know if they've like changed the canon at all.
That's true. There's approximately 87 ghost type Pokemon in the Pokemon
That's plenty
franchise.
for a game. And it doesn't have to just be in Lavender Town, right? It could be like Phasmophobia where you like travel to different places. Well, anyway. More Fatal Frame. So back in 2012, there was a spin-off to Fatal Frame called Spirit Camera, The Cursed Memoir for the Nintendo 3DS. What's really cool is this uses the 3DS's camera and AR technology, which I do feel was underused on the 3DS. I think actually people forget that the Nintendo 3DS could do AR, but it was the like pack-in that they had, I believe was an AR game, and Spirit Camera used this AR tech. In 2014, a new game called Fatal Frame, Maiden of Blackwater, would release on the Nintendo Wii. This game would get remastered on the Switch, PS4, PS5, Xbox, and Windows in 2021. So you can play at least two of the Fatal Frame games on Steam. They are priced as you would expect not Nintendo property, but they're priced pretty standard. Like I think Mask of the Lunar Eclipse is $49.99. I have not seen it go on sale, but maybe they will go on sale someday, and I will pick them up and try them. Reportedly in 2003, there were also plans to have a Hollywood film based on Fatal Frame. It went through production hell and at one point even had Steven Spielberg tied to the script, and it just kind of lived in production hell. And in 2014, they re-announced that they were making a Fatal Frame movie, and nothing has come of it. However, there was a Japanese film adaptation that was released in 2014, so maybe that's why Hollywood was like, oh, don't forget, we're also working on this movie. There are also references to Fatal Frame in other games, specifically in Smash Brothers. In Super Smash Brothers for the Nintendo 3DS, there's a trophy you can collect of Maya from the game Spirit Camera. In Super Smash Brothers for the Wii U, you can collect a trophy of Miu and Mayu from Crimson Butterfly, and the character of Yuri Kozukata from Maiden of Blackwater would appear in Super Smash Brothers Ultimate as an assist trophy, where you can summon her, and she has her camera, and her camera will stun people caught in its lens. Now,
nice.
Knowing the fact that the camera only stuns ghosts, does this confirm that all of the Super Smash Brother characters are actually dead?
Or does it confirm that maybe ghosts align with imaginary characters, and maybe they are all part of the Master Hand's imagination?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Because isn't he pulling them out of the toy boxes in the beginning?
Yeah.
If imaginary friends are also like ghosts, if you think they're the same, like if you believe in ghosts, why don't you believe in imaginary friends? But like they could be the same spectral goo, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that's why her camera works on bad guys.
That kid's so cool. That kid's got Super Mario figures, he's got Donkey Kong figures, and he's got figures from Fatal Frame. I
do want to say something on today, the day of recording. We made a joke at the beginning of this episode about how Fatal Frame reminded about a book that was written for Goosebumps called Say Cheese or Die.
Yeah.
On the day of recording, this is actually R.L. Stein's birthday.
Oh, happy birthday, R.L. Stein.
So happy birthday, R.L. Stein. Like a week and a half ago, because it's on the day of recording, but his birthday was October 8th, 1943. He's 81, or 82. He's 82.
Man, we could talk about the 2 retro Goosebumps games.
Do we have that slated for October spooky season?
No, but maybe next year. That will, I think, pretty much do it for our Fatal Frame episode. It's, I think, a really interesting game. It's a game that I think definitely deserves a little bit of love. I think it's got a really fun history, and the finding that Fatal Frame fan book with the testimonials from all of the staff was really interesting, especially because it had little illustrations showing their spooky encounters, including one of Shibata sleeping at his desk. He didn't sleep on top of his desk, he slept on the floor. But it's definitely an interesting game. It's got an interesting development history, and I do like very much that when it came out in America, they decided to slap the label based on a true story on it. That is some over-the-top confidence that you'd come to expect from an American distributor of a video game, being like, yes, this Japanese horror game based on a true story. Definitely, if you're interested in a horror game that does a little something different with combat, check out Fatal Frame. Now, to get into our retro rewind, Seth had me play Splatterhouse for the arcade. Originally released back in 1988, we actually talked about Splatterhouse way back in episode 152. But for those who don't remember that episode, it's a Namco game where you play a character named Rick, who is a psychology student at a local university. He is killed, and then he comes back to life to find his girlfriend. He is resurrected specifically by something called the Terror Mask, which is definitely not supposed to be Jason's mask from Friday the 13th. It is fun. Rick does not only wear the hockey mask like Jason, but he also wears the boiler suit like Michael Myers.
Yeah.
So he's just kind of an amalgamation of horror characters, but you get to play as him. It's a fun side-scrolling beat-em-up game where you fight off various monsters inspired by a whole mess of horror films, not just horror films of the 1980s, but also even earlier horror films and some obscure ones. There's a couple of references to things like The Reanimator, which was the H.P. Lovecraft movie based on the book. I really like Splatterhouse. I think it's got a great aesthetic. I like the idea that Rick is basically like a horror movie villain, but he's a good guy, and I like that he is on this quest that is, spoiler alert, in vain to save his girlfriend. There's a twist at the end, which we talk about in our episode 152. to. But I did find the arcade version to be way tougher than the other versions of the game I've played, because I've played one of the Sega versions and I've played, I think, a little bit of the TurboGrafx 16 version on an emulator, and the arcade version is tough. And I'm largely assuming it's tough because it is an arcade version of a video game, meaning they want to squeeze out as many quarters, or yen, I guess in this case, because it's originally released in Japan, out of me as possible. So they need to make it difficult. But overall, it's a fun game. I do think it holds up. Next week, Seth, you can play Nosferatu for the Super Nintendo.
I will, thank you. Zach had me play Nightmare on Elm Street for the NES, released in 1990 for the North American audience in October of 1990, of course. It wasn't released anywhere else, just in North America. So if you wanted to play some Nightmare on Elm Street, you had to come to the US of A or import it. It's a video game developed by Rare and published by LJN, which is based on the Wes Craven's film A Nightmare on Elm Street. Much to my chagrin, you do not play as Freddy Krueger, which makes me sad. You play as just a random child. I think the game would have been more fun if you were Freddy Krueger. The game is a horizontal beat-em-up game, which is a little dated. The sprite size is small. The combat is a little bit simple. I think the most frustrating part of the game is you're not really told which direction you're to go in. You can go left or right, so there's only two choices, but sometimes you go right, you go to a dead end, and the game, you have to turn around to go back the other way. Eventually, I found Freddy Krueger, and I punched him, and I beat him.
That's how the movie went. They found him, and they punched him.
I punched him. It said, Freddy Krueger is coming, and then you get into a fight with him where he runs around dancing like a crazy guy, and then you just punch him over and over again, and then he dies, and then you go back to the level. I assume you have to collect bones eventually and unlock doors and explore more, and I assume since the first boss was Freddy Krueger, all the bosses are Freddy Krueger, since it's a Nightmare on Elm Street. I think it would be weird if they added any additional monsters in it, but I feel also like they're spending everything out if all the bosses are Freddy Krueger.
I think it's I think you fight different variants of Freddy.
Yeah.
Like, I think at one point it's just his hands coming up or something like that.
No, he uses his hands.
Oh, does he?
As a combat maneuver. Yeah, I don't know if he always uses his hands as a combat maneuver, but as you punch him, he does different things while you're fighting him.
I see, okay.
The game does have a pretty good soundtrack that Zach can find and put here. The only issue for the soundtrack is that it repeats itself over and over again. So if you don't like the music, be prepared to hear it a lot. Overall, I think the game still holds up, be it it's dated on the NES. So like you're going to have to deal with smaller sprites, but it gave you plenty of lives. The controls were pretty tight and it played well, and I didn't hate myself, which is sometimes not the case after I play some of these games. So overall, I think it still holds up. Next week, Zach, you could play Seventh Guess for MS-DOS.
Oh, great. I will. Well, that will do it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for listening. If you have any memories of playing the Fatal Frame games, let us know by emailing us at classicgamingbrothers@gmail.com. We're available wherever podcasts can be found, be it Podbean, iTunes, or iHeartRadio. We're available on social media, Classic Gaming Brothers, CG Brothers Pod. We're available on our website, www.classicgamingbrothers.com. We're also available on Twitch and YouTube. Look us up, Classic Gaming Brothers. With that, Seth, am I forgetting anything?
Don't play games like my brother.
And don't play games like my brother.
I've been Seth.
And I've been Zach.
And we've been the Classic Gaming Brothers.
There.
That's right.